Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another fireside chat here at our FreightWaves 3PL Summit. I'm Kaylee Nix. I'm excited to have in for a really interesting conversation all about the merits of scheduling. We've got Tom Curie joining us from Q'd and Jeff Kim joining us from NTG. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today for our fireside chat.
Thanks for having us.
So as we are all very, very familiar, the supply chain runs honestly on like a second by second schedule, right? And as if one thing gets off, it's an entire cascade of problems that end up affecting the world. And when we're talking about it from the 3PL space, we know that brokers and your intermediaries are really kind of the gatekeepers of some of that scheduling. We've had to really kind of dig in on technology and the way that they do business, checking in with their drivers, checking in with their carriers, making sure the shippers know to keep things running. And it's been kind of a pain point, I think, for a lot of supply chain right now. So we're going to try and talk about fixing that, right? Tom, for you really fast, of course, we've got you from Q'd. Talk to us a little bit about scheduling and the importance and kind of where you guys are working to alleviate some of those pain points.
Yeah, I think, and first off, appreciate having the conversation here, highlighting this issue in the supply chain. I think the thing for me is this has been a problem for too long. It's one of those things that it has existed for a long time. Even Jeff and I, in our earliest days, we know this problem. We've lived this problem. We've been out there on the floor and experienced it for many years. And I think what has been great is the level of connectivity that is becoming available for us to actually bring a solution here.
So Jeff, from your point of view, talk to me a little bit about the scheduling world and where you guys sit in trying to fix this issue.
Yeah, so as Tom mentioned earlier, there's so many different parties that get involved in scheduling an appointment. I know you hear appointment, most people who haven't been in the industry think it's the most simple thing. It's one of the first things you learn. Then you realize how much it impacts your driver at the end of the day, right? The driver is the most important part of our business. Maximizing their efficiency, maximizing their productivity, giving them the right appointments, even, be able to get home on time for certain things, et cetera, is a huge factor. And at the end of the day, it comes down to the profitability, right? It's supply and demand. The better the appointment you can get, the more predictable it is, the better service you're going to have all around. You're going to have better costs, better service. You're going to have happier drivers. With the right appointment times, you minimize risk of theft. I know that's a huge topic lately. We've seen unprecedented numbers lately. And so, getting the right appointment, and that's working with your driver, their dispatcher, your customer, their customer, right? There's a lot of moving parts. And, you say appointments, it's like getting a reservation for a restaurant real quick. No, it's not that easy. It needs to be at the right time. And when you're competing with, tens of thousands of drivers trying to get somewhere, has a huge impact.
So I like zooming in a little bit on those words, the right appointment, right? Because it is different for every shipper. It's going to be different for every carrier. It's going to be different for every driver. It could be different for every load that you drop off, right? Every situation to situation. So when we're talking about some of those factors that make an appointment the right appointment, there is a million different inputs that we want to ultimately have the output of a good, solid appointment that happens on time, happens efficiently, gets the driver loaded and ready without incident, and gets the freight on the road. Tom, talk to me a little bit about services like Q'd and how they make sure that the right appointment is the key, right? Taking all of those input factors, kind of amalgamating them and making it happen so that the output is that perfect load.
Yeah, this is where really being able to leverage the latest in technology to help you inform these decisions matters, right? Like there's a lot of different ways that people are trying to apply AI today and try to make a strong use case for it in the industry. But when you talk about appointment scheduling, this is a really great spot, which is why we leverage it, is how many data points is squeezed into this process. It is insane the amount of things. You're talking hours of service. You're talking about both sides of the stop. Let's say it's a multi-stop. Let's say that it's a consolidated load where you're aggregating multiple stops and you need to bring those POs together. This is a really good use case to be able to leverage technology like that. The thing that matters for us is a lot of times when you start, you might have Jane always wants a 9 a.m. appointment. And so Jane trains John. So John's always going for 9 a.m. until the day John dies because Jane told him to. That's the only thing that he knows to do. And the reality is when you look across the entire supply chain, outside of just your own little bubble, 9 a.m. may not be the best scenario, not just for you, but for the other hundreds of carriers that are coming in. And this is where we really get into the conversation with a lot of our shippers that we're working with around this dynamic scheduling, right? To be able to say what actually makes the most sense based off of location of the truck, based off of the need of the commodity that's on the truck. Like all these things feed into a bigger data set that allow us to really help decide what is the right appointment. It's not just because I like 9 a.m., right? I mean, that's what we've done for years. It's much deeper than that.
So, Jeff, this is, of course, the 3PL Summit. So we want to take a look at it from that intermediary perspective. And knowing that the folks in our 3PLs are so just responsible, I think, for having to deal with a lot of the happiness of the driver, like we're talking about, but also the scheduling aspect and making sure that things are kept on time, on track. The check calls and the tracking apps and all of that now plays into the scheduling again, more data points. But talking to me from a 3PL standpoint, where can the intermediary sit in making sure that we're selecting the right appointments and making sure that we're keeping the driver happy and also kind of juggling all of those other input factors as well?
Yeah, a lot of what I say right now is going to be a little bit of a repeat of what Tom said, but it's really taking in as much data as you can get, right? And it's not just about the 3PL and the driver. It's, okay, what does the warehouse need? What docks are full? Where does, once the truck's unloaded, where does it need to go? Is there even space for that product? And making sure that all of that is dynamic and shared isn't really, really difficult in this industry, right? Like if I look at myself as just a 3PL or if I'm a scheduler, right? I'm just thinking, okay, I've got that one load I need to schedule. And like Tom said, I was told to do that at 9 a.m., right? And then you kind of get into a little back and forth with some facilities that they don't want to give you a 9 a.m. or they don't have a 9 a.m. available, right? Because everything is limited. We don't have unlimited dock space. We don't have unlimited, appointments that we can get. So it's really choosing, whatever is best for the entire scenario. And so being able to share that across your customer, your facility, your driver, your carrier, I think smooths out some of those conversations, and then backing that up with data. And so, AI is the hot topic, right? If I'm a person scheduling, I try to think through, hey, hours of service, is this early morning? Are they going to run into traffic? How's the weather there, right? Most of the middle of the country's been getting hit with ice storms, right? Factoring all those things in is almost kind of like tribal knowledge that you're taught by somebody, and then you try to factor that in. Being able to use AI and all the data that we get from shippers, carriers, partners like Qt, and using that to actually optimize the experience, it trickles all the way up and down the supply chain and gives a better experience and overall better value and cost.
So I want to bring this back around to when things don't go right. When stuff hits the fan, which it does all the time in the supply chain, right? A dock door is broken and you have to now get adjusted in the warehouse and there's not an open space for you. Or you get to the guard shack and the guard is not there and you're like, well, I'm going to be late to my appointment time by 15 minutes because now I'm locked out of the facility. Talk to me a little bit about the role that technology plays in maybe kind of taking over and smoothing things out and reducing the friction that happens when things do go wrong, which happens all the time, every single day in the supply chain.
Yeah, so I'll go first. So some of the larger players like ourselves and our competitors, we store that type of data. We have our own, just like our customers measure us and have KPIs. We're storing all that data on the back end ourselves. We're showing it to the customers that want to see it, but we're also using that ultimately in our RFP process and in pricing. And so when we know something typically goes wrong or there's long dwell times, et cetera, we price that in. And what we've seen happen is, for those players that don't price that in, they end up, winning the lane because they didn't factor in, 4 hours of load time, or, hey, there's a lot of layovers here, et cetera. They end up winning the lane, but then they get the lane, they run it, and they start running into actual problems, right? So then what does that do on the front end? Customers are not happy. They have to resource the lane. There's a lot of disruption. And when I say customers, it's not just, the shipper, it's the end customer, right? Just like we have our own customers, our own marketing team, our own sales team, most shippers have the exact same thing, right? They're trying to get their product on the shelves or to wherever they're going. And so it trickles all the way to the end consumer. And then ultimately, they're not happy. And then you have to go back to finance and say, hey, I have to reprice this lane because, we didn't factor these things in, or we need a new carrier. And, nobody's happy at that point. And then the carrier who priced that in, their capacity's gone because they've reallocated it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that is key to what Jeff said there, you can win freight in this business for being the cheapest on the bid. You can also win business by being the person who can execute on that. And I think that it really comes down to execution. I mean, we have customers that we've run into these scenarios where they were struggling in their quarterly business reviews because they weren't able to take on the freight because they weren't able to get the appointments fast enough to actually make that freight work for them. And so by being able to actually leverage the technology to immediately get prime appointments based off of your carrier capacity, based off of your carrier desires, and immediately plug that into TMS, it really changes the landscape. And that's where the profitability kicks in, right? Like that makes or break. I mean, we all know we've gotten those loads on a Friday that have to deliver on a Monday. No one likes that. And I've said for years that you can have a great lane, but if you have bad appointments, you have a horrible load. And it's just simple as that. And that's why I think this is becoming such a huge issue to resolve outside of just the time. Yeah, there's a lot of time spent on that. Yeah, we know that people touch them like, I don't know, like 3-4 times an appointment just because of the issues that you kind of mentioned there, Kaylee. Like there's a lot of touches in this, but on top of that, how much more important is it to be able to get prime appointments so that you can actually execute against that RFP and not have to be someone who's losing that lane that's being handed over to somebody else who can execute?
So I want to finish off this conversation by bringing up that point of dynamic scheduling that you brought up, Tom, a little bit earlier, because it's almost as if we're starting to see a shift in the overall way that the supply chain works into more of this kind of like flexible dynamic space. And technology has a lot to do with it, right? The fact that we're not relying on paper for every single thing that we're doing allows for a little bit more flexibility. But I think really we're starting to see a mindset shift as well, where being more dynamic, being more flexible, being able to kind of adjust on the fly helps tie into all those things that Jeff mentioned, the driver happiness and the wellness that you see and being able to take better care of your employers. Talk to me, just to wrap it up, a little bit about how pivoting from this like structure of rigidity, right? The Jane trains, I forgot the other name that you used, but the Jane trains her subordinate and 9 o'clock is always the appointment. We're moving from the rigidity into a world of flexibility. And talk to me just a little bit about the benefits of that.
So I think the thing that we've all learned is a lot of what we do gets driven by the shipper community, right? I mean, it's what impacts the 3PL business. It then impacts the carriers and the drivers associated to that. And a lot of this is coming from that shipper environment because most of them are allocating labor based off of trucks that are coming in and when they are coming in. Some of them do have additional docks, and they're actually talking to us now about saying, hey, can you tell us which slots we should open up and bring more labor in for so that it would be a better experience for the drivers and for the 3PLs that are working on these lanes. And so because of that, that's where this dynamic capability is starting to build. I mean, you got to have connectivity, right? That's the only way this happens. If we are doing it all on paper, no one's going to be able to say, you can fax that to me as fast as possible and I'll be able to figure it out and squeeze you. Like it's just not the reality anymore. But because we do have this level of API connectivity in these platforms, we're able to see movement and also institute some movement. So imagine these scenarios where we already know NTG is going to be able to be early for this load. Why not dynamically make an adjustment to that appointment because we already know XYZ isn't going to be there. And so we can leverage the labor that already exists there. It's a better experience for NTG. It's a better experience for the customer. It's a better experience for the driver. So it's really about the livelihood of everyone that's involved in this process. It creates such a ripple effect in terms of how we're capitalizing drivers' hours to be able to make this profitable for these companies. And so, and honestly, that's why all we focus on is appointments, is because there is that much detail in this process that if you do it right, the impact to your business is significant.
Jeff, any thoughts on that? He just said that he's going to make your guys' lives better all the time, right? Is that's the truth?
Music to my ears, right? So, that's why tracking is such a big factor, right? Like, I used to joke that, hey, if you can guarantee your truck will be on time every single time, nobody would ask about tracking because you're going to be there when you said you would be there. So being dynamic and flexible allows you to plan for some of that unplanned, right? The weather, the traffic, somebody just happened to wake up early and start driving earlier because they had the hours, et cetera. It let them plan for that and be efficient around it, optimize around it. That's where I think, the biggest, ROI is, honestly.
Well, guys, it's no doubt that the future lies in the technology, which helps contribute to this dynamic shift in the supply chain. And places like Qt and NTG are continuing to lead that. Thank you both so much for participating in the 3PL Summit today. Tom, where can people go to find a little bit more about Qt?
You can go to Qt.com.
Easy enough. And then, Jeff, what about NTG?
NTG, TI, we're a broker as well as a managed trans. So any needs you guys have, just come to us.
There we go, guys. Thank you again for joining us for the 3PL Summit, and thank you all for sticking around for our fireside chats today. We've got plenty more content coming up, so make sure you stick with us, and we'll be right back after this.